So, first of all, I want to say welcome. Here we are in this strange and magical way of being together. I feel a little bit reluctant to deplore the fact that we're not all together in a live place, which would be lovely, because probably for most of us, we wouldn't have any connection at all in that situation. So here we are, by the magic of the interweb. And I'm going to be talking about the body again. Sorry about that, but that's what I do. But first, let's talk about you. And I'm going to do my sharing screen. Oh yeah, that's what I want. And I need to move this. Okay. So this is where I am in Christchurch, just a little bit to the left of the Isle of Wight, to the west of the Isle of Wight. Actually, it was quite a nice day. It's clouding over now. Where are you? If you put into the chat, I get a feeling of the reach and scope of our communication. Where do I find the chat? It's gone. Here it is. Northern Western, yes. Manchester, Ringwood, not so far away. Staines, London, Devon. Well, okay, well, good spread. Welcome, everybody. So, and the other thing I want to know about you, we were addressing here the 4 fields of TA. What fields do you belong to? Put an initial letter, or a P or a T, or a no, there's no T, is there? A P or a C or an E or an O to indicate your specialities. I've had a little dabble in all of them myself. Hello, Jay. Okay. Welcome, Jay. And I'm going to stop sharing the screen now and start to look at the lots of P's. Okay. Well, that's very respectable. No shame in that. We're not going to be talking very much specifically about psychotherapy in what I address today, except in response when we get to dialogue and so on, we can think about how that might apply. More about organizational structures and stuff. So, and then I suppose the last thing is, have we met? Some faces I recognize. Who hasn't encountered me and my stuff? Let's just see who are the. So a different kind of welcome back to the people. So there are some people who've come back. If you're new, you can see it might be worth sometime this afternoon. Yes. So welcome to both kinds of people. And I was going to do some stuff talking about me, but I don't think I really want to bother with that. You can get the slides later if you want. And just what I was going to say was I've been doing this kind of stuff for quite a long time. It's actually 41 years since I first attended an ITA conference in 1982. Wonderful, life transforming. I did a 101 there. And I thought I knew the answer to everything. And I bought a copy of this book. You can see it's Transactional Analysis after Eric Berne, which seemed to have everything in it. And there's certainly some very inspiring things in there, some of which I may refer to as we go along. And in the time since, I spent 20 years as a teacher and a head teacher with with children with emotional and behavioural difficulties, and trained as a body psychotherapist and all that kind of stuff. And again, I'm going to use probably some anecdotes and vignettes from that to talk about the principles, and so you'll find out more about it. And as I say, if you email me with the address that I will give you, you'll get a copy of the slides, and you can find out the information that otherwise would have wasted your time talking about just now. So, just to conclude the preparatory elements, I want to encourage you to be comfortable. Those of you who know me will know me that that's something I go on about. The idea first to be comfortable was the very first practical lesson that we had in the Radix body psychotherapy training. You know, you pair up client and therapist, or as we called it in that particular setting, teacher and student. And the task was for the teacher, the therapist, to be comfortable, whatever other interaction was going on. And for me, that's been absolutely foundational through all my work. So, because we're going to look at a picture later on of the sort of maternal embrace and what that means to the psyche, you know, if you're going to be held, you would rather be held by somebody comfortable than by somebody fretful, anxious, and so on. So, and even for holding yourself, to start with, first be comfortable. I'll give you a more esoteric example, way of looking at that a bit later. But that very simple thing, first be comfortable. Because when you give yourself that permission, as if it's important that you're comfortable, things change. Just try it now. Just notice how you are. Do you need to stretch or let go of something or move in some way? Or can you just enjoy being comfortable? Because not noticing that you're not comfortable is very high up towards the top left-hand corner of the discount matrix. Something is trying to tell you that something needs to change, and yet you've got something going in you that you've somehow picked up that says doesn't really matter about you. Well, what if it does? Let's at least entertain the hypothesis that your well-being, your comfort is important, even though we're going to have intellectually challenging things to grapple with, and we're going to talk about the waves of deep emotion and trauma that have rushed through us and our society and so on. But still, we'd be better to address those things from a basis of comfort than get ourselves in too much of a stew. So I spent a bit longer on that than I expected to, but there it is. And be comfortable on Zoom. I mean, turn off your camera if you want to avoid the gaze. Turn off self-view if you don't like looking at yourself. Feel free to get up, move around, do what you need to do to be comfortable with yourself, to take in this experience that we're sharing together. So now, I learned from my good friend and colleague, Babette Rothschild, to start off with disclaimers. And so my first disclaimer is that, in a sense, what I'm telling you is my opinion. It's an opinion I feel free to stick up for, because it's based on quite a lot of experience and thought and engagement and stuff. But it's only an opinion. And in a sense, everything that we do, certainly everything we do together here, is an experiment. I'll talk to you about things which, in my experience, often work, or work for some people, and have worked for me. But nothing works for everybody, and nothing always works. So everything's an experiment. And the other thing, I don't know how much this is going to affect us today, but I always like to say it. Body awareness is such a rich thing, and it's the absolute center of the things I talk about. But it's potent, and therefore it can be, in some ways, upsetting, destabilizing. If we have made ourselves comfortable first, we're more likely to ride out any wave of discomfort that comes. But it can be that you somehow need to disconnect or take care of yourself. So be prepared to do that. It's more important that this is a sort of a next level. Be comfortable. If something seems triggering or upsetting to you, then take care of yourself. And I want you to know in advance, you have my blessing for that. I hope you will do it. I hope you won't need to. Last thing I want to say in my sort of preliminary announcements is, even at my great age, I still get quite passionate about this stuff, and that makes me talk quickly sometimes and use language which seems exciting and exhilarating to me, but may not be comprehensible. So you've got a little button where you can raise your hand, or you can actually raise your physical hand. I see everybody on this view. Yes, there are no second pages. So I will look out for that. But if it's not making sense to you, what I'm saying, or if it's enraging you or whatever, let me know. And we will see if we can collaborate. So let me go to flip through these things and come to this one and share the screen again. This one. So this is our topic. Body politic, and I got a bit carried away with myself. I thought this was rather clever. Politics as impingement. I didn't really understand what I meant by it till this morning, and so I had to kind of revise everything I had thought I was going to show you. So maybe a bit unfinished. I'm borrowing the word impingement here from Winnicott, and what he means by impingement, I think, is that it's those experiences that disrupt the necessary responsive holding environment that exists between the primary carer. I'm going to, for a shorthand, say mother, but I know that it is not always the biological mother, or not even necessarily a female person who is doing the mothering. And I think that politics arises because the social environment that we evolved to experience has somehow broken down, and it's not quite right for us. And so politics exists to see what we can do with it. And I base that view on a book that I encountered in those. I've very much been thinking about the 1980s as I've been preparing this stuff. In the 1980s, in the ITA, as it then was, the forerunner of the New Party, we had a very lively TA in education group. It included, amongst our members, two people who were to go on to win the Eric Byrne Memorial, Eric Byrne Medal. Ray Little, who in those days was he still is my friend, but he was my fellow trainee, and at that time he was a youth worker. And also Susanna Temple, who got the medal for functional fluency. Well, we had a big conference, and one of the people who came to that conference for TA in education, I imagine it was probably about 1986, because that's when her book was published, was Jean Liedloff, the author of The Continuum Concept. Do you know it? Do you not come across it? Well, I'll show you another slide there. Let's find this one. Okay, let's move on to the next one. That's the one. Now we'll share it. Here we go. The story of Jean Leadoff is really interesting. She was an American, and as a student in Italy, she met up with some people who said, we are off to the jungles of South America, I think to find either diamonds or emeralds. I can't remember now which it was. And she wasn't sure whether to go with them or not, but indeed she did go. And in fact, as she described it to us, I'm not sure if it's what she told us or what was in the book, but she actually had to run to catch the train as it was leaving, and off they went from Italy to South America. And there she spent time, didn't find any diamonds or emeralds, but she spent time with the indigenous people in the rainforest. And she was greatly struck by the quality of life that they had. And as she told it, she came back to her native New York and looked around in amazement at people amidst so much plenty who were miserable, and the people she had been with who had a kind of calm and happiness about their way of being that amidst fairly, in technological terms, primitive circumstances. She had an idea about what that was, how that was, but she went back more in the role of an anthropologist, really, to spend time with them. And the key to it, in her view, was the way of child rearing and what happened to young children as they grew into the world. And what she said coincides very much with what we get. I mean, this is a quote from Claude Steiner, but it's with a picture from Alan Shaw's Affect Regulation and the Birth of Self, that our sense of, I'm going to say, a kind of unshakable, intrinsic okayness is rooted in this biological mutuality of mother and child. And the ways that this was expressed amongst the people in the South American rainforest was in the constant availability of skin-to-skin contact for the small child until they didn't really want it anymore, and the process of developing an autonomy came up, and a very natural way of looking at these things. And her view was, I don't know if I can make this go back to the previous slide, but anyway, you've probably read it already. What it says is, for a couple of million years, human beings managed very well in relation to their environment, and now it's gone wrong. And her thought was that civilization had put us, that's just gone by itself, that civilization in some way has put us into trouble. So when I think about, this is my opinion, I said everything's my opinion, this definitely is, that what we call politics, the trying to arrange things within communities that are beyond our immediate scope of emotional understanding, is an attempt to deal with the discontinuity between how we evolved to live and be with each other and what life has turned into. There's been a lot of sublimation, you might say, in the that has produced culture and all kinds of different things, some of them quite toxic, in our struggle to deal with the psychological injury that's been imposed by civilization. And I've also pointed out here that I think this trouble not only manifests in our psyche, in our way of living together, but it also manifests in our relationship to the natural world. So I don't want to focus on politics particularly today. I want more to focus on how we can care for ourselves and support one another in this holy environment that our civilization and the politics with which we try to manage it has generated. And the touchstone for our political endeavours is the extent to which they encourage our spinal cords to shrivel or to lengthen. I'm going to pause at that point and see if you have any thoughts about that. Are you disappointed that I'm not going to focus on politics, for example? Or not? Okay, so where am I? Yeah. So what I think we need to look at, what I propose to spend time on today, is how do we care for our own sense of okayness. I'm going to elaborate this concept of okayness. It's about how we, I want to say it's a felt sense rather than an idea. It's something to do with how we feel in our body. And I have the quote, but I've lost it. Doesn't matter. You know what I mean about okayness. And it's something that we have to cultivate for ourselves, because most of us, and I think probably people who did get enough of it in their growing into the world, have since lost it. Sorry, not have since lost. That's something completely different. That's not my different one. They don't come to places like this, and we don't meet them in our working life. I think they're enjoying their life elsewhere. So most of us need to cultivate okayness, and the working definition that I have adopted from Denton Roberts. I don't know if any of you have come across Denton Roberts. I know one or two of you have. Who was the author of a book called Able and Equal, A Gentle Path to Peace. He deconstructed okayness into these, what he calls 5 healthy core beliefs. That is to say, capable. This I am, and everybody is. Hang on, somebody who needs admitting. There we go. I am capable, valuable, powerful, lovable, equal. And that sense of that is the state that he equates with the feeling of I'm okay. I'll tell you something. I did a workshop about this, a few years ago now. Blimey, 6 years ago. At a conference in when it was in Brighton, and we did a thing with a room full of people walking about, and so we said, pick one of these 5 beliefs and walk about as if it's true and meet with other people, and people seemed to enjoy that. But then, sort of a thought came to me, and I said, this time, walk about as if you're meeting, not only are you powerful, capable, valuable, whatever you have chosen, but the other person also is. And the atmosphere in the room really changed. It was quite a big group of people, so I didn't get to hear much of the sort of small group feedback, but the buzz in the room was just amazing. And there is something extra that comes with having the sense not only am I okay and have these qualities, but other people do too. It's an energetic switch. One of the articles in my ancient book from this published in 1978, but it has everything in it, was an article by Martin Groder. Have you heard of Martin Groder? he was a transactional analyst, and a rather revolutionary one. He founded the Asclepian community within the Marion County Penitentiary in Illinois as a therapeutic community for lifers. And he was working with psychopaths. History has communicated to us that he may have been a bit of a psychopath himself, and therefore that was probably why he was drawn to that population. But even people who were on the wrong end of his psychopathy said that he was a brilliant innovator. And as well as being the author of the concept of the Groda octahedron, which I may refer to later and have referred to before, he also had a notion of what he called the 5 OK system. He said, I'm okay, you're okay, that's 2. But then there's we're okay, you and me. I'm not sure about them. And then there's I'm okay, you're okay, we're okay, they're okay. That's 4. And then the last one, which he saw as being, more sort of transcendental, maybe if you're the Dalai Lama or someone, and you say it's okay. And so the 5 OK status it raises to another level. I was, because I had got this book out, I was looking at that again. In it, it's a fascinating diagram. He used some kind of statistical method to plot a graph of people with 1, 2, 3, 4, up to 5 OKs. And it starts with people lost in schizophrenia at sort of no one's okay. And then it goes through monsters, slobs, lunch buckets, normals, executive entrepreneurs, and, sort of quite fascinating. Anyway, I don't want to, but what I'm saying is the concept of okayness, it tends to get banal as if it doesn't mean very much. And of course, sometimes we use okay in exactly that way. How are you doing? Okay. But the okay that we talk about as the core of our conceptual framework when we're using TA in that way is something much more profound than that, in my view, and many faceted and rich with resonance. So the question is, in an environment which is not the good enough holding environment socially for us that it might be, it's not bad. And one of the things I was thinking about as an illustration of this issue of our okayness within the holding environment and so on, these spreading ripples and layers of it, is that if you imagine, I don't know, a family that was living in the Ukraine a few years ago, would a nice healthy family, everybody got along nicely and so on, they would have a good situation. And there might have been a miserable, dysfunctional family alongside them. That same family now might not be able to live where they were anymore, may have to go. So the surrounding human content for them, the holding environment, the social holding environment, may be different. And some people may go to a healthy and supportive place, and other people go to a troubled place, and some people might go to a terrible place. And there's a sort of mystery about the interaction of these different holding environments to me, because you can imagine that the family that was relatively well integrated will hold together longer in the refugee camp than the family that was already dysregulated. And yet, and even when we complain about our the lack of care, wisdom, prudence, or whatever lacking qualities we may project onto the state that we live in, it's doing a reasonable job, isn't it? I mean, compared to other people around the world. But we have this tussle here about, how we would like it to be. our transference onto the nation, the state, the political setup as the good or not so good parent. Now, let me recollect myself, because I got quite interested in what I was saying, and I can't remember what I was going to say next. Yeah. So we have to recognize that the longed for holding environment is not going to come to us, whatever we do, and politics won't bring it. I don't think politics will bring it. I spent quite a bit of time in the 1970s. I was a member of the NUT in East London. And I met with people deeply embedded in politics. Yeah, I'll give you a brief vignette because I do think it's relevant. I was teaching anyway, and I was a member of the union because, that's what you do, but I wasn't really interested in that stuff. But I belonged to a kind of sort of school of philosophical inquiry that had nothing to do with any of these things, but somehow the word went round there that it was possible that people of evil intent were infiltrating the teaching unions with a view to bringing down civilization as we know it. And we were all exhorted to go and see what was happening at the time. I was very skeptical about that. I thought it sounds like a little tosh to me. So I went down and joined up the East London Teachers Association in Stepney, where I was working at the time. And I went to a meeting, and someone was going around with a magazine, and I thought, well, I'll have a copy of that because I've gone there to inquire. And they said, well, do you want to come to this conference the next weekend? We're talking about it. I said, yeah, I'll come to the conference. So I went to the conference, and it was organised by, I had a different name at the time, I think International Marxist Group or something. Anyway, what became the Socialist Workers' Party, and some others. And it was about, that in the 1970s, there was a lot of tussle about being able to afford to live in London on the London allowance and so on. So nothing changes, does it? It's exactly the same issues. And it turned out that I was in a discussion where somebody said, what I don't really understand is, are we pushing for higher wages for teachers because we deserve it? Or is it because we want to force up the inflationary spiral? And God, in those days, inflation went up to 20% or something. And thus bringing about the downfall of society as we know it. And amongst these folk, a very lively discussion ensued, which concluded that these were both highly desirable objectives, and so we should push ahead with both of them. So I came away recognizing that it was perfectly true, that there were people who wanted to bring down a society as we know it. And I spent time listening to the people. And there were two groups, as it happens for me, significantly, in deadlock in the East London Teachers Association. The old-fashioned Communist Party style communists, this was before, Stalin was recognized to be a baddie in the fall of the Berlin Wall and everything. They were committed, and they would say to me, as I listened, they say, these young people don't realize we won't see the revolution, but we've got to keep working for it. And then there were the younger, more enthusiastic people who said, these people, old people, the Trotskyites, these old folks don't realize we need the revolution now. And because neither of them would get the majority, I ended up being they rather grandly named president, although actually it was, the chairperson of the association, because I was the compromise candidate. And I learned a lot about politics, and I didn't have the language of contamination and games. I was just beginning to encounter that in those days. I certainly got to see it in practice. It was really interesting, and it made me, and I could see how politics for most of those people was something they were impassioned about because of their disappointment that the world, that life, that society didn't bring them what they needed. So they knew there was something wrong. They didn't want, as I saw it, to tolerate the uncertainty and frustration of not knowing how to fix it. And if you knew how to fix it, which for them was the watchword they had was the raising of consciousness through experience of struggle. And I witnessed that quite often in action, where there was a problem and there could have been a solution. But the doctrine was, don't negotiate the solution, intensify the conflict, and then you will reveal the extent to which you are oppressed. And I certainly saw it working. So personally, I have largely despaired of politics. And so what I think we need to think about are, how do we look after ourselves in what feels like a frustrating, disappointing social context? And I found myself coming back again and again to the notion of the shriveling spinal cord. In a sense, if we're not stroked, says Byrne, our spinal cord will shrivel up. So we have to find a way to lengthen our spinal cord. So I'll tell you about one of those ways. Some of you will have heard it before, but it bears repeating. This is when you know it, it's a 3-second practice that can help to put you on a stable basis. And it's called the 3 treasures. It comes from the Chinese tradition of Qigong. Qigong means energy work and covers all kinds of stuff. The thing that people most know is Tai Chi. Tai Chi is a very special, really elaborate and refined example of the thousands of different forms and models of Qigong that have evolved and disseminated themselves in China and through the world in over thousands of years. But this one is very simple and basic. And I've got some pictures of it. So I will display them and talk you through it. So here we go, the 3 treasures. And the 3 treasures are body, breath, presence. And I will, and that's it. That's it. If you are feeling adrift, out of touch with yourself, oppressed, distressed, then say to yourself, body, breath, presence. That's the 3-second practice. Now, it's like a little I'm going to say radiator, something that radiates, and you charge it up by keeping on doing it. And also we'll charge it up a bit because I'll explain the elements. But once you know it, you don't have to think about the explanation of the elements. You just do it. So let's just go through these one at a time. I'm not showing it yet, am I? Here we go. Right. Share screen, share the element. And click there. So here we go. The 3 treasures. This is with curly whirly Tai Chi symbols. Body represents the earth, the yang element, the solidity, the substance, where the presence is mindfulness, consciousness, awareness. You can use lots of different names for it. Spirit. If you have a religious frame of reference, you can link it to that. And between them is the sort of vibration of vitality, which is between heaven and earth. Humans are said to have this role, and it's the flow which includes, so simply and symbolically, it's breath. And the symbol, the analogy of the candle is used for this. The solid substance of the candle and the wick is the body, the substance. The flame is the living, dynamic, always changing, always moving aspect, and the light is the spirit. So what you do for the practice, say body, and feel the presence of your body, how solid it is. We'll go a little more deeply into this in a moment. And part of that feeling the body is to rise to your full height. I'll talk about the refinements of that too in a moment, but when you do that, it probably makes you breathe. So here we go from the top again, body, and then the breath sort of comes. So you name it and join in with it, body, breath. If you find the breathing is stuck, for reasons which, again, I'll go into a bit, they're interesting and they are the key to understanding how to escape from drivers and the mini-script. But again, I'll touch on that in a moment. If you need to breathe, if you feel like you need to breathe more, do not do that sucking in the breath and focusing on forcing the in-breath. If you're going to have intentional breathing, intentionally breathe out. Then let the in-breath come by itself. And then naturally you'll move to the third phase, which is opening out of your awareness. So then that's the presence. That's just opening, let the mind open, let the senses open, while keeping an awareness of the solidity of your body and the dynamism of your breath. So did you try it? Let's do it. So body, and when you're sitting, I mean, you can do it standing up. When you're sitting with the body part, I would just push your feet into the floor a little bit, as if you're going to tip your chair back or something, but don't. So just you feel, because you've got big muscles in the thighs, the lower back, that will be activated by that. And that will help you to feel the solidity. There are sensors in the soles of the feet that trigger the postural muscles to hold us better. So that pressing into the feet, and if you don't really feel your feet, then first step is wiggle your toes. If you can think of the most ungrounded situation imaginable, it will be somebody doing a spacewalk with a malfunction in their spacesuit, right? How much more ungrounded can you be? Well, three astronauts have talked about how the thing to do when you find yourself in that situation. There was one guy with his face mask was filling up with water that wasn't being properly recycled. Is to wiggle your toes. And the way they described it, I don't know quite how valid this is in terms of the anatomy and physiology precisely, but it's like you know that the front of your brain is connected all the way through. You got a connection all the way through. So wiggle the toes. Also, the other good thing about wiggling your toes is it makes you smile. And we'll come back to the smile, because the smile is the icing on this particular cake we're talking about. Wiggle the toes, put a little bit of weight into your feet, and let your spine lengthen. And the way it was taught to me when I first started doing Tai Chi was take a lofty philosophical view. So feel solid. And so now you've got the solid frame. I'll amplify this a bit more with a reference to embryology. When you were, I think, a few weeks old, you were about the size of a little bean. And if that little blob forms into a tube, and there are 3 layers to the tube, there's called the dermic layers, and there's the endoderm, which is on the inside, the mesoderm, which is in the middle, and the ectoderm, which is on the outside. You may have heard of endomorphs, mesomorphs, and ectomorphs. So the endoderm becomes the gut and the internal organs, the heart, all that stuff. So it's the tube that runs right through us. The mesoderm becomes the muscles and the bones, and the ectoderm becomes the skin, but also the whole nervous system, including the brain. So when we're doing that first part of the grounding, we're activating the mesoderm, the muscles and the bones, and feeling the solidity. And I'm talking about it a lot, but when you do it, it takes less than a second. Body. And I'm hoping now all these associations come to you with that, this solidity, muscle and bone and stuff. Activation of the muscle. And then breath is the translation of the word qi, which is in the Chinese formulation. And qi means life and energy. And through this tube, all this pulsatory stuff goes on. The peristalsis in the gut, the breathing, the heartbeat, all of this is the endoderm at work in different ways. So body, breath, we let that, and then it will flow on by itself. We tend to block it and stop it in different ways as we get tense and anxious and disconnected. When we've made ourselves comfortable, the breath will flow easily. And then presence, awareness, openness, just let the senses take in. That's the flame. So let's do the practice again. Body, breath, presence. And you can sink into that. You can use it as a meditation. You can do it for hours on end. See, I met a guy who was a Tibetan Dharma, and who in his training had to meditate sitting beside a lake, and they would dip this, in the mountains, dip the sheets in the lake, wrap them around him, and he would, with his meditation, would have to generate heat and dry out these sheets, and apparently he was very good at it. But he would say that with me. So you can be there and do your body, or you can just let it be a moment for coming to yourself. You will notice that your spinal cord is being lengthened in this process. And probably you're going to be more ready to believe that you are capable, valuable, powerful, lovable, equal at the end of that process than you were at the beginning. That's the plan. And that's the very simplest 3-second thing you can do to put yourself in a position not to be oppressed, frustrated, disappointed, dismayed by the failure of the environment around you to meet your perceived needs. Thoughts, questions, challenges, what's going on in your minds? Or has it all been so restful that not a single thought is
we were talking in our group about saying how the breath is so important. It's something you don't really notice, but
yes.
We were just saying how psychologically, you can just suddenly be held in this space, and unless somebody suddenly says to you, like, breathe, or you're caught in the act of somehow not breathing, I don't tend to notice it immediately.
Well, right. And being aware of breathing is something in itself quite profound, and there are whole systems built on it. And maybe I'll pick on that to elaborate something I said earlier. I'll remember to do that, but before I do launch into that, let's see if anybody else got thoughts or questions, revelations, or anything that's come up.
Michael, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
This is probably quite practical, but
Yes.
I've learned sort of stabilization techniques for people with trauma, and a lot of it's based around the breathing. And perhaps this is just my issue, but I find it quite have an awkwardness when I'm doing it with clients.
Getting people to breathe in different ways.
Well, just sitting with them and showing them it, and that might not be something you can help me with. I just need to practice or work with it.
Interesting for you to notice it, Catherine. Yes, I think in a way, perhaps that links to what I was going to say anyway. At least I can taught it until it does.
Okay.
I mentioned sort of in passing in a way that in doing the middle bit, the breathing part of the three treasures, that to emphasize breathing out. And and I think at that time I alluded to the mini-script and drivers and so on. So I think I'll say a bit more about that. If somebody says to you, breathe, mostly what we'll do is like that. We sort of pull, and that comes from intention. One of the reasons why breathing is such an interesting thing, and why those of us in the field of body psychotherapy really focus on it, is because breathing is controlled by the two different branches of the nervous system. Most, in a sense, spontaneously, say while you're sleeping and not even thinking about it, is being regulated by the autonomic nervous system and just carrying on by itself. But you can, as a matter of practice, intentionally decide, breathe faster or breathe slower. So there's a point of intervention, of intersection between what's going on spontaneously. Well, I say spontaneously, if we were not so conditioned, it would be spontaneously, but we are conditioned. And you can say that Wilhelm Reich talked about the body armor as a way in which we tighten up muscles and parts of our system in response to impingement and in response to less than optimal reactions from the environment around us to our spontaneous gesture. So if I reach out, whether in joy or in need, and I make that reaching movement, and probably with an in-breath going with it, and I get a hostile response or I get no response, that's going to be a really painful experience for me, more than I want to experience again. And I will learn to inhibit that reaching, probably differently if it's an aggressive response than if it's an abandoning response. Longing it. But nevertheless, a pattern is going to be set up in my muscles, but also in my autonomic nervous system. I'm going to remember that. It's a trauma, in fact. When I'm a tiny infant, I have no capacity to regulate the world around me. It's only regulated if my part of the symbiotic nervous system that links me to my primary caregiver is able to communicate and get a response from the other person. Otherwise, my communication leads to something painful, and I want to stop it. So there will be muscular elements to that, but there'll also be a repatterning of the nervous system, stuff that Alan Shaw writes about in affect regulation and the birth of self, and particularly the volume about pathology. So there's that pattern there. And so we don't easily have access to the spontaneous, easy breathing. We strive about breathing, reaching, and that's where I say, so in a sense, that moment of despair is the bottom left-hand corner of the manuscript triangle. It's the depressive position. It didn't work. It's awful. Because I don't get support to tolerate that awfulness until the autonomic nervous system ticks over and brings the next spontaneous movement, I feel I have to do something with my primitive, desperate nervous system that's not actually able to manage the world. I have to do something. What I do is not sustainable. And before we finish, I had a revelation this morning when I was thinking about these exercises. There is one exercise I'm going to show you when you want to use all your drivers. The only time. But otherwise you don't. And so the difference between feel stuck in the breathing, I'm not breathing right. If I force it to come in, but if I force it to come out, if I push it to come out and then wait, may seem like an awful long time that you wait. It may be scary because you may be remembering times of desperateness. Nevertheless, the wave will come, and it will come spontaneously. It will not come from an effort. It will come from the spontaneous action of the autonomic nervous system. I don't know if you know the book Zen Flesh, Zen Bones, if you ever read that stuff in those days. But at the end of it, there's a little passage which is not about Zen. It's from another Hindu text. And it's got all these little sutras which are about moments of enlightenment. And a couple of them refer to this moment. It says, "Oh, beloved, at the turning point when the in-breath dissolves and becomes the out-breath, there you will find the moment of transcendence," or words to that effect. And so it's something rather special and magical. So it's part of meditation practice too, that we surrender to something. It came to me as a revelation that something to which we surrender is actually Mother Nature. We strive for the mothering that we didn't get. But actually now, it's because going back to this situation of the underdeveloped nervous system, which can signal but not mobilize and not do action, not make things change. That's in the primary symbiosis where the infant needs the primary caregiver's nervous system to do the actions that will bring the relief to the body of the child. And if it doesn't get that, then it feels like there's no possibility. Now, we will mature into our nervous system and we will have the ability to do those things for ourselves. But we remember with such anguish the situation where we couldn't. We're one, we resent doing it because we think someone else ought to do it, which is, was true at the time. But also we don't know that we can do it. And what's needed is that little moment of waiting. The thing that T.S. Eliot says in the, in the Four Quartets, so wait without hope, for hope would be hope for the wrong thing. Wait without love, for love would be love for the wrong thing. There is also faith, but the faith and the hope and the love are all in the waiting. This is that dark night of the soul moment of staying through that. And then the thing that comes is something we didn't know existed, but which is actually part of us. So that breathing out and letting the breath come by itself is a transformative moment, I think. And so even though this is a 3-second exercise, it contains in it a little core of something potentially transformational. The thing about it is, the sages say, the practice is easy, perseverance is difficult. And I say, the first few thousand times are the hardest. But on the other hand, something that takes 3 seconds you can, you can get quite a lot of practice in quite a short space of time. And so when it comes to breathing, if you get feeling uneasy about the kind of performance of it, I would start with that and do it for yourself and possibly encourage your client to do it. So just let the breath go out, see what happens, see whether you ever breathe again. And it will come. And it may come still, the whole, Eric Byrne said, think sphincter, right? And this endoderm is full of a whole bunch of sphincters all the way along it. That's what's happening there. And so the release and the return to a spontaneous flow of those sphincters is the thing you're looking for. And little goes a long way. Try to make things happen with breathing. There are ways to do that, and in the racking bodywork that we do, sometimes we do heroic, very vigorous breathing and shouting and all that kind of stuff. And in the right time and in the right context for the right person, that's good. But just a little bit of surrendering to breathing, of tolerating, invoking this thing when I think it's a kind of magic solvent for the psyche, what I call benign curiosity. It's how interesting, let's see what happens. And so if you let your attention and your support for the client exploring with their breathing be very gentle in that way. And also I would say, first be comfortable. Come back to that, because in a sense, if you think, I've got to do this breathing with this person, and what it does to you is put you in a more tense, unresourced state. It's not helpful to them either. So let's take this breathing easier. And I got to think, I was doing this website for Babette Rothschild called 8 Keys to Safe Trauma Recovery. And we got a request from somebody who said, what can you give people like me who are traumatized and are freaked out by paying attention to our body or breathing? Tricky. But it's, those are the sort of immediate tools, feel how you are in your body. But if someone's going, no, make me feel my body's where all the trouble is. And if I breathe, things start moving. That's the last thing I want. And the thing I came up with, and it's in Babette's books, in Body Remember certainly, is muscle tensing. So you make yourself more tense. There are different ways to do it. Pushing your feet in the floor the way we're doing, but more strongly is one. Make a fist. So it's like put your foot down. I mean, I came up with these slogans. Put your foot down, make a fist, get a grip. There's a thing with the arms where if you push out with the elbow and resist with the other hand, you get some tension in the, or some muscle tone in the outer side of the triceps muscle there. So you sort of push that in this tension. And what you then do with all of these things is you do it till you feel it, sort of muscle tires a little bit, and then you relax it a little bit, but keep the feeling of the muscle. And what that tends to do is to help people have more feeling of control and more feeling of a boundary. And there's a few others. So if breathing is freaky, be gentle with it. Because the thing that the traumatized person needs most is permission to have their experience without it changing. And then if you can find something that will lightly land into that situation, or something that dramatically lands in that situation that improves matters, that's good. But if it freaks you, then possibly your countertransference is telling you they're not ready for it. So, and here's another thing. Especially with people's energy fields with trauma are usually wide open. And so you pick up a lot in your own energy fields, that sort of countertransference. Regulating your own state and looking for the response in them is something to experiment with. So it's like she feels, I don't feel calm. How am I going to make her calm down? But if I say, well, she's not calm, I'm going to calm down. I'm going to do my three treasures. I'm going to calm down, and then I'm going to watch and see, does that resonate in the field that we share? And if it does, good. If it doesn't, oh, wasn't that what next? But it's sense benign curiosity appear, we deserve it too. How interesting. This is more difficult for me. If you're not comfortable, something in you is giving you a hard time, and you need the psychic acro prop to keep it off you.
Michael?
Yeah.
Just a tip from me working with the body when I didn't have a body, as you know, when I started all this work many, many years ago.
Yes.
Just encouraging the client to yawn, and then you can both yawn together, and that's a really good re-establishing a base to start.
Absolutely. Yawning is fantastic. And also if you just yawn, because yawning is catching.
I do worry that they might think I'm bored with them. So that
well,
be work in itself, but
all right.
yes.
And laughing too. And these are things that rebalance the autonomic nervous system in favor of the parasympathetic. Yawning will do that. And it's also a good sign. If you see somebody yawn, it probably means they've let go a bit. Also, tummy rumbling. Think sphincter. The sphincters have tightened up. When you move into sympathetic activation, fight, flight, or, get stuck in a freeze, all of this seizes up. Lots of blood lives in the gut most of the time. But when we want the fighting and flighting, we need it in the muscles. So the circulation is shut down in the gut. And also the blood withdraws from the skin, so you don't bleed as you run through the brambles or whatever. When you begin to calm down and the rebalancing is happening, then the blood is going to flow into the gut and the sphincters are going to release. And so you'll hear that. And I one client in particular, that was my clue, when she'd sort of really gone away, and then gurgle, gurgle. And so, all right, she's coming back. Yeah. But be gentle with yourself first, and that will make the field easier to work in. Other thoughts, questions, challenges, observations? Okay, well, if you think of something, come up with it. I'll tell you a bit more about the three treasures. Each of them has an adjustment. The three treasures, and it's got it all written down here. Have I? Yes. So the body part, if you're standing, the adjustments are soften the knees and have the three levels, which is level in the hips, level in the shoulders, the gaze level. Quite often when we try and stand up straight, the back of our neck is shortened because that's the startle reflex. And so the neck gets short like that. And so we think we're being straight, but we're actually looking up there. What many of us do, because we have this posture, and so I learned from Alexander teachers, is we adjust our eyes. So our head is looking like that. We look. So then when we bring our head straight, our eyes are looking at the ground, like dipped headlights, if you like. And you have to let yourself adjust rather than thinking, oh no, I'll go like that. So eyes level, shoulders level, hips level, sink the weight down. That's the body adjustment. The breath adjustment is, this is the 2-second exercise by itself. It's got a lovely name, Fang Song. And it's this. And we do it in this, we use it to adjust the breathing, but you can do it by itself. And it's just release down and then release up, which is not stretching up, but which is letting go of everything that stops you rising to your full stature. So release down, release up. And you just, it's even quicker than the three treasure. I love that. But if you do it with the breath, and so again, let it go down and let it come up. But this is about allowing, not making. And once you've got that flow, you can add a little bit of intention to it. So you can say, I'm going to breathe more fully once it's flowing. But if you don't want to be making the breath, you want to be encouraging the breath to flow into the corners of the chest, to open the chest and to move down and mobilize things deep in the belly. Once it's moving, but not pushing. And the adjustment for the awareness, presence, it's just to let it flow out. Remember there's different senses and have the feeling of space in silence. And then the cherry on the top is smile. I've got a thing here. Where is the Dalai Lama? Yes, here it is. People said to the Dalai Lama, what can we give you? He beamed at the audience. That is easy, he said. Just give me your smiles. It makes me good when I see people smile at me. And if you smile at each other, that would be very good. And the smile is a healing thing in itself. Studies have shown they didn't experiment people with a pencil. Some people had a pencil like this. Risorius muscles, the ones that make you smile, are activated. Some people had it like this. The sort of pursed lips muscles are activated. Then they did various things. They got people to draw pictures or comment on pictures and stuff. And there were more happy words and more reaction to happy things in the people who had their muscles artificially forced into this smiling position, and more miserable ones. And so studies have shown, so it must be true, that smile is a good thing. Yeah. Yes. Somebody was going to say something? No? Yes?
Could I, Michael, could I ask, I don't think I'm going too much of a tangent. I'm just thinking about one of my clients who has, you know, they used to take massive amounts of cocaine, and they've done phenomenally well to control that and manage it. But they say to me, there's not a day goes by that they don't have that urge and think about it.
Yes.
And I'm just thinking in terms of, have you done this sort of work with people who have addiction? Is this a way of almost like helping people to calm their systems down in a way, or?
Well, it's certainly worth thinking about. It's not something I've got a lot of experience of. But what I would say is there'd be a value in bringing the body into awareness. So, I mean, one of the questions, sort of universal spanner in a way, is as you think about that, what happens in your body? Now, some people can talk about that and other people can't, but you can look and you can see, and you can say, I notice as you talk about that, it looks as if your shoulders crunching together, or it looks as if your throat tightens or something like that. So in any case, even before you ask about it, observe and see what you see, because that will give you a clue. Because if you see some contraction or distortion or loss of muscle tone or something, you'll have a clue as to what the counter movement would be. And then so to notice what that is. Another thing I think is for somebody who are going to get carried away by preoccupation and things, is to look for anchors and strawberries, by which I mean memories with a rich sensory component of times when they felt good. and those sort of have a place in the body, and connecting with the body will help. This is what Babette Rothschild talks a lot. She's quoting from Anthony Damasio, who talks about the idea of somatic markers. When we have a vivid experience, we have the body shape of it. We have and if we did an exercise when Babette was teaching this, I was assisting, was to think of a time you really liked and just adopt the posture that you were in. And remember that. And then other people would copy the posture. And it was amazing how close people would get to what it was. Sometimes it was obvious. There's one woman who's holding her first grandchild. But you could, and you had a whole wave of emotion coming from that. So if people can think of a time that's a resource to them, it's a good time. William Bloom calls it strawberries, those moments of vivid experience. And then shuttle between that and the difficult thing. So it's like, I'm thinking about cocaine again. Yeah, well, just remember cuddling the Labrador, or grinding the spices in the pestle and mortar, or whatever thing it is, and then shuttle between those two states. So you get a shift in state. And then you'd look in that, and this is where it connects back to where we started in a way. When somebody connects with the anchor, the strawberry, the whatever metaphor, with that good experience felt in the body, there's likely to be that release of the anxiety, of the tension, of the longing, because presumably the encounter with cocaine is about avoiding something that feels appalling, awful. And the ability to sort of somehow surrender and move through that awfulness is the thing you wanted to get to in the end. So,
Thank you. Yeah, that really does fit, actually. Yep.
So I thought I would just share with you what having spoken about it, this thing I said about when you can use your drivers. So I'm going to show you something, and I want you to do it. I want you to try hard to get it perfect. I will not be pleased unless you do, and quickly. So this is the cosmic shrug. Some of you know it. And the cosmic shrug is done like this. Exactly like this. No, nothing vague about it. It had to be perfectly done and really put yourself in. You pull your shoulders up to your ears as far as they will go. And as you do it, you breathe. And this time you intentionally breathe in. Then, without breathing anymore, you pull the shoulders back so that the points of your shoulder blades are squeezing together as if you could hold something between the point of the shoulder blade. And then you let it sink down, not pushing, but just releasing gradually with a sigh, an audible sigh. Oh. You do this 3 times perfectly. Your suffering is not important. You just work through that. Be strong. When you've done the 3rd time, just rotate the shoulders slightly, and then you let your shoulders open up to their full width. Take a breath. Let the breath flow in. You don't have to force the breath. And then you say to yourself the word magnificent.
Magnificent.
And let it resonate. This is called the cosmic shrug, and I invented it. I discovered it. It came to me. Because these shoulders, the trapezius muscle, the one across the back here, in particular, is the muscle of responsibility. And when we feel that the whole world or the universe depends on us, it gets rigid. And so we have to put all that energy into loosening it. And you find that you have more space. Whenever you have been taking on more than your share of the burden, it's a good thing to do. And that reminds me of Claude Steiner's recipe for not rescuing. What is it? There are three things, and I can only remember two of them. Don't do,
Persecutor, rescuer, victim. Is that it?
sorry?
I was just thinking persecutor, rescuer, victim.
No,
was
no,
it?
this is about how not to be a rescuer. The things to do,
Opposite.
not to
Yes,
get into
I've
the
got-
rescuing role.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Is yes, don't do what you're not asked for, and don't do more than, he says 50%, but I would say your proper share, because sometimes people need, and it's to do in terms of embodiment and grounding. It's about having your stance, this sort of Tai Chi stance, where they say, do not let your knee go beyond your toe. So you reach out, but you're not, as if somebody pulled your hand, you would sink down, you wouldn't be pulled over. If the knee goes beyond the toe and somebody pulls, you'll go flying. So you reach out and say, it's there. Do you want to come and take it? Don't give what you do what you're not asked for. Don't do more than half. And there's a third thing. Anyway, you can find it somewhere in the literature, but it's to do with that interacting from a I'm okay, you're okay position, because clearly the message of the rescuer is I'm okay, you're not okay, you need my help. And we don't want to send that message, do we? So, the other thing I thought about introducing in this context was the thing I call the psychic acroprop. Some of you may have heard me talk about it. I've got a picture, so I'll find that. Here we go. Click, 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 click. Click, click. These are things we've done. Break. Purify the heart. Oh, yes, we can do purify the hearts too. Well, they're relevant. They're connected. So, yes. More elaborate picture of that, but still, here we go. Let me go to sharing the screen and share this. So here we have a picture of an acroprop. It's this kind of scaffold pole, which has a screw handle in it. And also this one is the one you need. It's got a hydraulic jack that, so when the ceiling and the floor want to come together and squash you, you get your acroprop and you make the jack and they go back to where they meant to be. And if we think about an ego state diagram applied to organizational situations, you have the parent organization, which has expectations and demands, which are not usually wholly mediated by reason and a clear perception of what is, but contain a certain amount of contamination in the way of assumptions and prejudices. And then I thought about this when I was working at London Underground as that, whoa, can I go back? Oh no. How do I go back on this thing? I don't know. Ah, like that. Yes. Well, so I'll leave that there. I was external clinical supervisor to the counselling and trauma service at London Underground for 9 years. And I'll show you the picture. The first day I was going there, I saw I was going by, it was near Victoria Station. And it was one of those times when the platforms are crowded, they shut the gates and won't let people in. And I'm going to show you a picture of that now, because it was my first day working there. And I had this sort of vision. Here's the picture. So this is the people who want to get into the underground. And this is, and there were some staff there. You don't see them here, but there were some staff there trying to stop them. And I had this picture of an inverted pyramid, and I thought, here is the public of London who want to get where they want to get to with a ruthless determination. There's no consideration for anybody. Then there's the whole staff of London Underground who try to deliver this as best they can within their constraints. Some of them are going to crack up, and they're going to come to the counselling service, and the counselling service is going to have to try and deal with this pressure, with this huge weight at the top of the pyramid, and then I'm going to be at the bottom, at the pointy end, trying to deal with that. And it gave me a picture of a sort of what Eric Byrne calls the structural diagram. I don't have an illustration of the structural diagram that will help you, but it's like he's in the Principles of Group Treatment. There's a chapter about this, and he says you may not think, a clinician may not think much about the structural diagram most of the time. And the structural diagram is him as the therapist, chief of the institution, the funding organizations, the government, and with the press in there and everything, and then the patients and, other staff down below. Here's the structure. And he says, but if a patient on the third floor is standing on the windowsill threatening to jump, suddenly this picture of this organizational structure will come vividly into his mind. Who are these people and who is answerable to whom? And I was struck by that, and I thought, well, here is the system. Then later, I'm going to go back to my other diagram. I watched what happened, and I mean, sadly, yesterday was the last day of the existence of the counselling and trauma service at London Underground. It's a tragedy and a travesty. When I went there in 2007, they were still reeling from having been dealing with 7/7. And there was an amazing team of counsellors. I think there were about 15. The client group, you can imagine, is about as diverse as it could possibly be, from senior management to the people who sweep the platforms, in terms of ethnicity and every other kind of diversity, vast. And it was a very diverse and skilled and talented team of counsellors. It was wonderful to work with. Yeah. And now it's gone. And I carried on doing a bit of supervision for a few people who I had worked with there. And just by a strange coincidence, one of the last remaining people there needed a supervisor for the last few weeks. So I did my last supervision on Wednesday with the last surviving member there. But to me, it's a tragedy because it was such a good thing, and it was crushed. And it is represented by that picture here. So here, the parent organization here is Transport for London. The adult circle was the counselling and trauma service, and then the child group is the whole client group. So the parent organization had demands and expectations. The client group had demands and expectations, and inevitably they could not all be met. And I saw the process of I'd meant to make a diagram that shows this. But what you can see is if you imagine that the adult section is then divided into its parent, adult, child part. Then the parent of the in the professional group gets contaminated by the pressure, and they think they should do this. I've got to look after, but I've got to do all these things, and then their own child wishes and needs get contaminated. And the manager, who's poor start in the middle, was they just crushed one after another, and now the whole thing has been crushed. And it made me think about what you would need to push apart the two polarities. And it also triggered me to focus on two things which people who know me will know very well, which is at this boundary, at the point where these things meet, where the reality principle has to resist the wishful and fearful thinking of the less rational parts, that is where frustration and disappointment arise. And I have come to see these as the key things that we need to be looking at and welcoming and cherishing, because when we feel frustration and disappointment, it tells us that we have not been accounting, but discounting. And wherever there's discount, as you know, there's also grandiosity. And so when you feel frustration or disappointment, it means you need to recalibrate because you thought reality was different from what it is. But it's something to recognize that you need both the hydraulic pump that the guy's got in his hand here, and you need the acro prop that can be adjusted if you're feeling the squeeze between those adult and child. I mean, it's a simplification, but those demands and expectations from above and the needs and wishes from below. And you need to reconcile yourself to experiencing and delivering to other people frustration and disappointment, whether you like it or not. So I'm going to show you one more Qigong thing that has to do with that. Well, actually two. One of them is a movement from a thing called the 8 Pieces of Brocade, a very famous Qigong sequence called Pushing Apart Heaven and Earth. And it very much has to do with this process of keeping the upper and the lower things in their place. You need to stand up for this. And if you don't want to do it, that's all right. But if you feel oppressed, I'm going to have to move my screen back a bit. Yeah, that'll do it. So what you do is just do your Fang Song, sink and rise, and then push down with one hand, push up with the other, keep the gaze level, and just feel that stretch in the shoulders. A little bit of spring in the knees, and then the hands just float as if you're doing this underwater, past each other, and push. And let yourself feel your head just floating up, rising to your full height. So that's pushing apart heaven and earth. And if you feel under pressure, this is a way to encourage your spinal cord to unshrivel. And then the other thing I'm going to show you is the fourth movement of the 9 phases of Qi, and it's called Purify the Heart. And you do it like this. Nice grounding. And then you're going to push out as if against strong resistance, pushing apart the rock in the hard place. Breathe out with the push, and then just keep breathing. And release that. And now you're going to push up the weight of the world that's coming down on you. keeping a nice soft bounciness in the knees. You're going to push forward and make a boundary, knowing that the boundary is the place where you can meet. Keep a little softness in the elbow so there's some spring. That's where you can be met. And then push down the rising tide of complexity, as if you're pushing two pieces of wood down into the water. And we'll do this again with a slightly different feeling. This time, instead of being pushing against weight, let yourself be exploring the space. See how far that will go, as if you're finding something. And similarly, pushing up, but pushing up to see how far you can get. Same with the pushing out, same with the pushing down. And then the last time, it's just expansion. This is the three treasures again. One for the body, one for the breath, one for the spirit. And you can repeat that many times. I have found it useful, and people I've shown it to have told me that they found it useful to make space when you feel that you need it. When you feel that crushing, you can have it in all those directions. So it's something that can help you, as it were, to get your psychic apropos in place. Got a couple of minutes, literally. Anything you want to say, ask, comment on, protest about? I will put together the slides of this thing. I will see what books I referred to and make a thing. And if you email me at the address that's there, which is embodied.therapy@btinternet.com, I will send it to you. And after that, I will send you information about things I'm going to be doing. I'm going to be doing some actual live workshops this year again for first time for a long time. I booked a place for 3 different times at Avon Tyrrell during the year, and I've got some other plans, and I'm doing something a bit like this, but a bit different in April at in Cardiff. So if you send me your email, you'll get to hear about that.